Chapter 46. I lay awake the rest of the night, thinking about what had just happened. The best way to describe it is if you ever been in church and you felt moved to tears by the Holy Spirit, and you could feel God in the air. You know that feeling? Imagine that feeling times 1,000, and you'll know what it's like when the Holy Spirit descends upon you. Now, not just nearby, not just in the vicinity, right? But upon you, as in right on top of you. Now, in retrospect, I think that feeling in church and what we felt on June 29th, 2019 are just different degrees of the same thing. Spirit drawing close. And not necessarily just the Holy Spirit or Jesus, but other spirit as well. And I've since learned to associate that same feeling, right, of presence in the room and hair standing on end with Michelle when she draws close to me, which happens often, thank God. And her presence feels different than the Holy Spirit. It feels nothing like that, but there's some similarities there that are unmistakable. With the hair standing on end, for one thing, is what I know is her is that I will feel her presence, right? I will feel her, and then I'll have a physical response, like with the goosebumps. And this isn't in the book. That's in the book, but something else that's not in the book that I talk about with my buddy John Smith is there's really two ways that I communicate with her. One is basically, I think of it, one is when she comes here like that, what I just described with the goosebumps and feeling her presence and whatnot. But there's another way too, when I go there, and that's completely different. That is, and John understands what I'm talking about. John is, me and John is so weird. We walk parallel paths in some ways. But he's a nurse, and he works with cancer kids, and he's helped a lot of people die. And he understands this story in a way that very few human beings really understand it. God put him in my life and me in his life for a reason. But anyhow, I know it's her. And I was telling you about the other way I communicate with her. And that's when I go there. And it's a quiet place. I don't know how to explain it except for you have to still your mind. There's no feeling, no goosebumps and things like that there. Okay, you don't experience that at all, but you do feel a connection. You know it's them. I don't know if meditate is the right word or what, but basically, man, you call out with your heart to them. You call out with every fiber of your being to them. That's it. And they'll hear you if that connection is strong. And she does. And I can feel her, hear her, and there's not a lot of, so communication with people that are passed. I don't know how it is for other people. Other people experience this too, but for me, that communication is not like usually something like we have a conversation or anything like that. It's not like that. It's just an unmistakable feeling of their presence. And real, not like you, not imagined, but real. That's the only real way to describe it. You know that a communication is taking place. And nothing can ever substitute for having your loved one with you and being able to really communicate with them like you do when they're alive. But it's something, it's something. And I'm thankful for it, that I can still communicate with her. I'm so thankful for it. I still miss the hell out of her. But I'm thankful for this communication. I thank God for it, for letting us do this. I don't know if I could have made it without it. I don't know how I would have made it through it if we didn't have a bond like this that I could still communicate with her. If I lost that completely, I don't know how I made it through it. It killed me, like literally. I don't think I'd have survived it. God blessed us. Blessed us with knowledge of how the world works when the veil is lifted. Now, I don't know if you believe this of yourself or not, right? Doesn't matter. Keep an open mind about it, right? Just keep an open mind about it and pursue truth. That's it. It'll find you, okay? It'll find you. Just keep an open mind. Don't close yourself off. Keep an open mind. God will find you. Promise you. I didn't start off believing this stuff. Just kept an open mind. God found me. I'm a scientist, man. I didn't start off like this. Religious at all. I'll talk more about that later. I just thought that was important enough to talk about what that is, what I experience when I communicate with Michelle. I want to talk about that a little bit. So it's a digression, and it's not in the book, but definitely worth mentioning and worth elaborating upon a little bit. So, like I said, her presence feels different than the Holy Spirit. I've never felt the temperature in the room change or the sheer magnitude of the power that we felt that day. But there are unmistakable similarities, and she lets me know it's her. Now, on the morning of June 29th, 2019, I was still trying to process everything. Okay, now I'm in a good headspace now. I've had plenty of time to think about what happened and make sense of it. But that morning, can you imagine where my mind was? I probably sounded like a madman when the girls came over and I attempted to describe what happened. And Danielle was the first to arrive. I told her we had church up in there last night. And I told her about the Holy Spirit and Michelle squeezing my hand and the message about being a shepherd. And I repeated all that to Brooke and Savannah a little later when they arrived. And I usually gave them the spot next to their mama on the bed as soon as they got there. But, man, I could not bring myself to relinquish it that day until around noon. And then I tore myself away from it. Good manners finally forced me to give it to him, you know. But I literally had to tear myself away from him. And if you've never cared for someone who is dying before, understand that you never know when the breath they're taking is going to be their last one. And you become incredibly in tune with them so that you can respond to their needs as best as possible and as quickly as you can. Now, in my case, I had an overwhelming need to be there with Michelle, to touch her and let her hear my voice and let her feel my presence when her body gave out, as she crossed over. I didn't want her to do that alone, right? With no final words said and no one to comfort her on this side of grace. Until her very final moments on earth, I wanted her to know that she was loved. Now, at a certain point, that last breath can come at any moment. And we'd been there for several days now. Now, up to this point, we changed her bedding and the dressings on her arm every other day because, well, the bedding was mostly just so the sheets would smell fresh and stuff, but they didn't really get that dirty to where they needed to be. The sheets and all that needed to be changed. We just did it so they smelled fresh. But the dressings were another story because the arm tissue continued to die, and from the elbow up was just completely destroyed by cancer. It was awful. And the bandages needed to be changed every other day just because they got soiled. They were saturated in soil. Just dead tissue. And the cancer had just continued on its mindless, scorched earth path of destruction. It marched all the way across the left breast and all the way up to her collarbone. And now they were red, hard areas that would turn into sores eventually, like the ones that ravaged her arm. Now, since squeezing my hand earlier that morning when the Holy Spirit was in the room with us, Michelle had slept all day. And she'd only briefly fluttered her eyes a couple times. Too weak and too tired to communicate at all. Then we just loved on her all day. Talking to her, telling her how much we care about her and love her. And keeping her mouth clean. And giving her tiny little spongefuls of water. Adjusting pillows in tiny ways we'd seen her do. Any little attempt to keep her comfortable. And around 7:30 p.m., before the girls were prepared to leave for the evening, as they were getting ready, we talked about whether or not to change Michelle's arm dressings. And the sheets were fine, and they weren't worth going through all the trouble of using draw sheets and all that stuff to have changed them. It wasn't worth needlessly disturbing her over that. But the dressings were another story. They were just completely soiled, and we debated on whether or not we should disturb her and change them, right? Because you have to disturb somebody, to change those dressings. You generally don't want to disturb somebody who's dying. On the one hand, it would require us to hold her up in a sitting position. There was 4 of us, so it was real easy to do, and we had one on each side. And somebody, we got really good at it too. We could do it really quickly. We'd hold her up in a sitting position and remove the old bandages. And now, the way that the bandages were actually adult diapers, right? That's how covered the wound was, right? And it was brilliant. The people at hospice came up with that idea, because putting on bandages the other way would have been impossible, right? It was so much better to use the adult diapers, because it covered it perfectly, and it had the straps in the right places and stuff. So you could do it really quickly, and that's what we did. So we'd have to hold her up, take the old ones off. We just put slather the sulfadiazine cream, stuff for burn victims on it, and it covered. And we got so good at it that we could do it really fast. And we knew if we were going to do it this time, we'd do it even faster. But it is disturbing somebody, you know what I mean, as they're dying. And it was either do that or let her die with filthy bandages. And there was just something that did not seem right about that. Just didn't seem right. And I said, there's no good answer, girls. But whatever we do, if we do it from a place of love, it won't be wrong. And your mama will know that we did our very best to take as loving care of her as possible. There was just something that didn't seem right about letting Michelle die with filthy bandages. This is a woman that took care of herself. She took pride in her appearance, even when she was sick and not feeling well with cancer. And we decided to replace the soiled dressings. And I'm going to tell you what, with a speed and skill that only comes with great care and lots of practice, we changed them out in record time. And we gently let her down. Fresh, clean bandages. And as we eased her into a laying position, she took her very last breath. It was almost as if to say, that's what I was waiting on. I'm ready, let's go. What's up, buddy? And the girls, they immediately started crying. Bawling. And Danielle second guessed some just completely insignificant details. How she held her mother. That meant nothing. She didn't, as we were laying it down, it was nothing. It was a completely insignificant detail. And she second guessed herself. And I said, don't you dare do that. Don't you dare do that to yourself. Over the past 2 months, I've watched you girls take the most loving care of your mom that any parent or human being could ever wish for. Cancer killed your mama. Don't you dare blame yourself for anything. Any of you. We love her. And we did everything we knew how to do. And we did it with love in our hearts. And your mama knows this, believe me. And at that very moment, a single tear ran down Michelle's cheek. Just like this one. Now, it had only been a few seconds right at this point since she'd taken her last breath. And I knew she could still hear me. I said, darling, it's okay. We'll be okay. I'll make sure of it. I promise you, my love. I picked up my Bible from where it was laying next to me, and I prayed over my wife with her daughters, each of us with a hand on her and holding her hands as she slipped from this world into the next. Now, because of what happened earlier that morning, I didn't just have to rely on faith to believe that Jesus was at that very moment with Michelle. I knew it like I knew my Social Security number. And I thanked him. I told him I love him. The last words that Michelle heard on this earth were the words of Jesus coming from her husband's mouth. And the very first words she heard in spirit were probably the very same ones as she stood there with Jesus, him saying them with me. It would be several hours before they came to prepare her for burial. And during that time, I led Taz onto the bed so he would see her and understand and be able to say goodbye. And he did understand. And I let him lay next to Michelle for a while, looking sad and withdrawn. And he would mourn her right along with the rest of us. And when the gentlemen from the funeral home arrived, they were dressed sharply in suits, even though by now it was very late at night. The manner was very respectful and solemn, and when I told them I wanted to help carry her out, they obliged, and one of the gentlemen stood aside and allowed me to do his part. And the reason I did that is because that final act was part of a promise I made my Michelle almost a year and a half earlier, on February 16th, 2018, the day we found out she had cancer. I told her I'd be there with her every single step of the way. I would keep that promise to her for every single step that I could take with her. My darling wife, Michelle Lamar Baker, took her final breath at home at 7:33 p.m. on June 29th, 2019. She left peacefully and painlessly, ready in mind, body, and spirit. And she was comforted and welcomed home by a beautiful man named Jesus Christ of Nazareth. She was loved beyond measure and still is.